Hello, this is Dean Kernut, and welcome to the Alpha Exchange, where we explore topics in financial markets associated with managing risk, generating return, and the deployment of capital in the alternative investment industry. In 1989, a year before he played Tommy DeVito, the gangster in Goodfellas who took out Billy Bats and asked Henry Hill if he was a clown, Joe Pesci played Leo Getz in Lethal Weapon 2. Famous for saying the word okay more than 100 times in this sequel, Leo has a particular set of skills, as Liam Neeson would say. For Leo, the expertise is nothing in the realm of self-defense. He's no help should Riggs or Murtaugh get taken. Leo is a financial crook, and early on in the movie we learn what he excels in. Describing to his two new besties the convoluted process by which stolen funds are cared for, Leo proudly states, "It's now yours, and it's clean. It's now laundered." Sadly, Leo Getz is not the subject of this forthcoming discussion, but laundering is one part of it. Vol laundering, that is. First, some definitions. Vol, of course, is volatility, that thing that drives the VIX, that thing that made GME famous, that thing that makes its way into the risk-free treasury market, too. All else equal, we prefer less vol, especially if we don't have to sacrifice return in the process. But Mr. Market, a stingy fellow, generally prevents this from happening. Or does he? How about that wonderful turn of phrase, vol laundering? It's got a criminal connotation to it, and one has to assume Leo Getz could excel in this pursuit. Few are more associated with the term vol laundering than AQR founder and CIO Cliff Asness. Having listened to a number of podcasts that Cliff has done, and having been lucky enough to have him speak at my Macro Minds event in 2023, one thing is certain, and that is intellectual honesty in finance is of chief importance to Cliff. Here's what he said at the conference.
Using privates in an endowment, I think it was generally assumed that there was a big illiquidity premium. You got paid a lot extra for the fact that these things didn't trade and you couldn't get out if you wanted to. I think over time, that feature, that bug of illiquidity has become a feature.
Enter the rage of taking both equity and credit risk in private markets. Preqin reports that private credit assets amount to $1.6 trillion today across a wide range of risk and return profiles. 2023 was by far the largest vintage year. Private equity assets under management is at least 4 times that of private credit. David Swensen took the reins as Yale's CIO in 1985 and would go on to pioneer what is now often called the endowment model, using the university's long-dated, durable capital to bear illiquidity risk and earn a fair degree of extra return along the way. Today's private market exposures are democratized and being embraced by investors of all shapes and sizes, often with little regard for investment horizon. The MO is now seemingly less about that extra juicy return and more about not having to reckon with realistic market prices. You want to report an attractive Sharpe, you've got a few levers to pull, one in the numerator and one in the denominator. It's the denominator, the risk, that has become the focus. At the heart of the issue is the tendency for private equity and private credit to smooth returns and, in the process, inflate Sharpe ratios. If the public equity market offers a piddling Sharpe of less than 1, well then why would SPY be in your portfolio when private equity offers a Sharpe of 2, 3, heck, how about 4? We've seen the tables showing how adding these private assets can not only increase return, but reduce risk in the process. Voila, as Leo Getz told us, it's been laundered. If private equity is the poster child of vol laundering, what then is its opposite? Nassim Taleb crafted the term anti-fragile to describe a property that is truly rare, benefiting from and strengthening in response to a shock. It's a rather brilliant concept. Markets are inherently fragile. Asset prices, counterparty exposures, complex products, the instabilities of geopolitics make them so. Is there an anti-fragile asset within markets? Identifying and acquiring it could come in handy should that 100-year storm occur. You know, the one that seems to happen once every decade. In the old days of risk on, risk off, the US government bond market might make its way into a conversation about anti-fragility. Look at how the bond market rallied during crisis events like 87, 98, '08. I've talked a lot about the correlation of stocks and bonds on this podcast. And for the folks using duration as a risk mitigation tool, that correlation has now seen better days. It's been in positive, not negative territory for a while now. But there's something else about the government bond market that deprives it of the very hard to reach anti-fragility status. And that's March of 2020, when even the US Treasury market buckled under the immense demand for cash. For two great explanations on what happened here, see previous Alpha Exchange podcasts with JP Morgan's Josh Younger and Stanford's Darrell Duffy. It's one thing to withstand a crisis. It's fully another to thrive, to gather strength as a result of one. And being long vol at a reasonable price is that exposure. From Valentine's Day to March 16th of 2020, the VIX went from 14 to 83. Hello, that's anti-fragile. Back to laundering. Laundering is about concealment, hiding, stashing, burying. In the securities business, we all know about anti-money laundering, AML. Vol laundering is AMM, anti-mark-to-market. Vol laundering is the market's version of concealed carry. You're still carrying the risk, you just hide it. So if anti-fragile is the opposite of fragile, what is the opposite of vol laundering? If smoothing returns is the feature, not bug, of private equity and credit, what strategy fully embraces the virtue of honest mark-to-market risk? What strategy highlights price shocks and the resulting level at which a portfolio could be unwound in a hurry as the basis of thinking about its efficacy? I will put forth that exposure to vol, to the anti-fragile, is going to be part of this. That is, long exposure to options-based insurance. Being very focused on mark-to-market risk is about embracing the unforeseen and feeling good about the implications for your portfolio. Let's stipulate that a defining characteristic of the profile of risk assets is the occasional tendency for correlation and volatility to surge and for liquidity to plummet. Let's further agree that some of the best buying opportunities occur in distressed markets that leave prices dislocated from fair value. How might we put ourselves in a position to play offense during these difficult periods? To state the obvious, it's not easy to buy when you are already nursing losses from decisions you've made previously. Said a little bit differently, we need an asset that converts to cash at just the right time. In the traditional days of risk on, risk off, duration exposure generally worked. Stocks got hit, bonds rallied, softening the overall blow to your portfolio. But we've seen that in a true crisis, a liquidation event as I call it, even bonds are not impervious to the market's need for cash. These events, thankfully, are extremely rare, and there's no reason to think that March of 2020 is going to happen again. But we should recognize that today's stock-bond correlations aren't so friendly from a risk mitigation perspective. We've often seen them go entirely the other way, with rising, not falling interest rates associated with falling stock prices. Amidst these shifting correlations and frothy asset prices, investors need to think carefully about playing defense. It's simply not enough to rely on the witchcraft of vol laundering. This brings us to the hedging portion of this short pod and what I'd like to call the portrait of a perfect hedge. First, the most explicit, most exact hedge is simply to sell. No tracking error, no vol risk premium, no strike to choose, no expiration scheduled to track. Now, for some at least, there is the minor consideration called taxes. In a recent pod, Cuban's collar is Jensen's alpha, I explored the economics of using zero-cost collars to reduce risk, gain liquidity, and defer taxes. Check it out. There are both audio and video versions of this short pod on the Alpha Exchange YouTube page. Let's assume you don't want to, or in the case of locked up capital, cannot sell. What are your options? Pun firmly intended. Ultimately, a hedge overlay on top of a portfolio of risk assets is about renting anti-correlation. That is, parting with some premium for exposure that goes the opposite way of what you already have on. I will add that it ought to especially go the opposite way during stressed markets. Let's call this conditional downside anti-correlation. What are the characteristics of the perfect hedge? First, let's state the obvious. The hedge should have minimum cost for a relative amount of protection. Let's borrow from GARP and call this CALC, convexity at lowest cost. You folks know I do love a good acronym. Essentially, as in the stock picking side of the business, hedging is about trying to maximize your bang for the buck. It's not easy, and some would even say not possible. Show me a very low-cost option structure, and I will show you one that isn't worth all that much. I'm in the camp that option markets are highly efficient, but also of the view that there's alpha to be added at the edges with respect to designing a hedge. I'll explore this in a future podcast. The second component of our portrait of a perfect hedge is that it should empower other parts of the portfolio through its anti-correlation. When your longs are suffering, this ought to be thriving. This invites a discussion on the benefits and pitfalls of taking basis risk in the hedge. That is, might it make sense to use some proxy asset? Can an equity investor, for example, utilize a put option on the HYG? Another topic we can return to, but suffice it to say, you can't call it a hedge if there's too much basis risk. Third, the perfect hedge ought to have a high degree of convexity. This is critical. This is the anti-fragile concept. The hedge payoff should be substantial on extreme moves because your portfolio is suffering from those same extreme moves. In options, you do get what you pay for. Someone shows you a 1x2 put spread and tells you that they found a cheap hedge, politely hang up on them. This is all about mark-to-market risk and embracing the wayward scenarios that, unpleasant as they may be, are surely headed our way again at some point. That 1x2 put spread is short vol, short tails, and will turn long delta at just the time you don't want it to. We want a hedge that expands in premium when we shock vol higher. Remember, AVL, anti-vol laundering, is honest about mark-to-market risk. Fourth, the perfect hedge is both highly liquid and transparent. Remember, we want to be able to convert it to cash at a moment's notice if need be. A dual underlying exotic executed on a bilateral basis with a dealer is probably not going to satisfy that requirement. You go to unwind, and wouldn't you know, the trader is in a meeting for 45 minutes. He'll take a look when he returns. Stay with on-the-run vanilla options that have deep liquidity. Bid offers always widen during market vol episodes, so staying in products with deep liquidity pools is important. Fifth, the hedge should be easy to track, analyze, and understand. In sizing it, your starting point is going to be some assessment of how it interacts with your portfolio historically. This is going to be far easier using liquid listed options for which good price histories exist. You want to be able to run the hedge through the various stress events that markets have encountered. 1998, 2001, 08, 2011, 2015, 2018, 2020, 2022 are a few examples. You also want to shock it through low vol periods like 2006 and 2017 and see how much it bleeds. You also want to be able to understand the option and easily decompose its drivers. There isn't a lot of price history on some of the OTC options the street gins up. But even if there were, generating P&L attribution is going to be more difficult because the options are more complicated. You want to understand the drivers of changes in the hedge performance, and staying with basics like delta, gamma, theta, and vega are a good idea. So that's the portrait of a perfect hedge. Transparent, liquid convexity, acquired at a low cost, consistently anti-correlated to your portfolio, and serving to empower you to buy in stressed markets. With an overlay of options-based insurance, you embrace the unknown, just as the vol launderer asks you to do the opposite. With that, I'm at my 2,000 word limit, and it's time to say goodbye. Until next time, I wish you a prosperous week ahead.
You've been listening to the Alpha Exchange. If you've enjoyed the show, please do tell a friend. And before we leave, I wanted to invite you to drop us some feedback, as we aim to utilize these conversations to contribute to the investment community's understanding of risk. Your input is valuable and provides direction on where we should focus. Please email us at feedback@alphaexchangepodcast.com. Thanks again, and catch you next time.